All right, we are recording this in February. I think it comes out in March, but I can say March of 2024 is one of my favorite moments now. So fortunate and lucky to have Samm Deighan join the podcast. I'm sure you all know her for a variety of ways. She is a film historian and currently working at Vinegar Syndrome. Sam, thank you so much for joining today.
Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Huge thank yous from me as well. You have had quite a journey, and I think, we're going to get into this today, but I feel like there's this funny kind of brand around you now, which is so exciting. When people talk about Sam Deighan, I'm not even sure they know exactly who they're talking about sometimes. They just love the image and love what's being produced. But congratulations on your very exciting career.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's extremely weird to think about myself as a brand.
Yeah, I
Kind of
can
hurts my
imagine.
brain a little.
Well, actually, speaking of the brand of Sam Deighan, congratulations on so many accolades in the Shelf Shock Awards that just happened.
I know, I was so blown away. I took the weekend off from email and most social media, so it
Mm-mm-mm.
was a total surprise to me Monday morning,
Yeah,
but it's very, very grateful for all the kind words and, it's always great to be recognized by
sure.
peers and friends and so
Well, it's,
nice.
it's well deserved. And I think for the 5% of people that don't know what we're talking about, I think I was very excited to talk to you today because I think when it comes to commentaries, I grew up with sort of one name, and that was Annette Insdorf. That was in the early 2000s,
She's the best.
right?
I love
Uh,
her so much. I basically wrote I wrote a book about art house cinema in
mhm.
World War II, and she was a huge inspiration for that. She's amazing.
She is amazing, and I've heard her voice for countless hours as I got into Criterion early on in my life. And now I think you've kind of taken the mantle. I mean, I can't imagine there's maybe a few others in terms of just on art house, on genre, on commentaries, on video essays, on booklets. I mean, you're everywhere. So congratulations just for this kind of rapid ascent as well.
Thank you, and I'm sorry for being so in your face for anyone who does not like my work.
That's awesome. Well, I'd be curious to hear their argument if that's true. What I thought would be interesting, because you've definitely done podcasts before, and you definitely, people have certainly heard your story. One thing I didn't hear, and if it has been done, maybe I just missed it. But I thought it'd be really interesting today as we kind of talk to you to kind of walk through what it's like to get to where you are in your career, and whether or not you want to think yourself as a brand, or whether just the fact that you're this sort of established name now. I'm sure people are calling you as opposed to vice versa early on. All these kind of things that as people are thinking about building up a reputation for being able to do certain things. I thought there would be interesting to have a discussion with you just in kind of talking through your life and kind of how you got here and how you got into film and all these things. So are you good if we kind of take that path today?
Yeah, sure. That sounds great.
Wonderful. Very excited to do it. So going back to young Sam, some kid, have you been watching Pinky Violence films since you were 5, 6, 7 years old, or what was your cinema
Thankfully,
journey
no.
like? Okay.
Uh, my cinema journey was an interesting blend of things.
Okay.
So I grew up in kind of a bad, crazy family situation,
Okay.
which meant the bonus was that I could watch whatever the hell I wanted and no
Okay.
one told me no.
Okay.
So
All
so
right.
I definitely watched some things from an early age that I perhaps should not have. But I also got a weirdly well-rounded introduction to film because my grandmother, who I was really close with, loved classic Hollywood.
Okay.
So we would watch, like, once Turner Classic Movies came around, we would watch all kinds of things together. She was obsessed with Orson Welles, which is probably where I get my
Wow.
love for him
Interesting.
from. But she was also willing to watch anything with me. I think she recognized from an early age in my life that if you have a family member or a child that you're trying to get closer to, like, letting them explore their interests is such
Hmm.
an important part of that. And so
Hmm.
she would often watch horror movies with me, maybe not when I was 6 or 7, but like by the time I moved in with my grandparents when I was 14, she would watch anything with me.
Oh,
Like
cool.
this woman watched Hellraiser, she watched The Gates of Hell with me the first time I ever saw it. And by the time it got to the priest, and I was raised Catholic and she
Okay.
was like a, I would say a more progressive Catholic, but still like seeing a priest kill himself in a graveyard, she was like, "Oh boy." And had to leave halfway through, but
Oh
still
shit.
no judgment.
That's great.
And I'm very grateful for that because I know a lot of other women who were not encouraged to get into more extreme art
Mm,
in the
mm,
way that I was. Like my
mm.
dad introduced me to things like folklore and mythology and fantasy and horror literature. And so I think all of that just kind of fed into my love for horror film, which was really the first genre that I was like deep in love with.
Okay, interesting. And you grew up in the States?
Yeah, I grew up in New Jersey outside of Philadelphia, but I
Okay.
also lived in Canada for a while as a kid.
Okay. And video store era? Like you had access to
Oh
video?
yes. Oh
Okay.
yes. My grandfather would take me to the video store every week and would just shake his head at what whatever I rented.
That's interesting. Yeah, I had a similar, I would say, I don't know your story, but when it comes to movies, at least, I had a similar parental style. I don't think they knew. I remember one time I was in middle school and I was watching Friday, and my mom walked in and she's like, I think this is too much. I don't think you should be watching this. But, which is fair for a 12-year-old, I don't know.
Sure.
But she didn't make me stop. She just had an opinion on it.
Which is
Um,
awesome. So many parents are like, "Turn this off right now." Whereas I think for me, my grandfather was super logical and his whole
mhm.
thing was like, "If you're curious about it and you have a question, I will be here to answer it so that you
Yeah.
get actual factual information and
Cool.
not like not just no, this is not something you're allowed to know about."
Yeah.
So helpful.
How did that go with Gates of Hell? How did that conversation go?
Well, I think by then he had already survived me asking all kinds of horrible
Okay.
questions. Like, I definitely, when I was probably 11 or 12, based on some metal song lyric, I was like, "So what's sodomy?" So
Ah.
this man literally was a saint and would answer any question. And one of my many love languages is asking questions. So
Mm,
it's
mm.
like, the more I like you, the more annoying I will become.
Oh shit! I have a 6-year-old now. I can't imagine. I mean, I guess the best thing you just answered, right? So that
Yep,
you now
he
you
had a
know.
lot of patience.
That's interesting. So, as you, horror was your first love. As you got into that, typically, I know a lot of people. Their stories are kind of mid to late teens is when something happened. They saw some movie or something happened, and they kind of they realized that they like movies more than other people, or that this was something that they really like are passionate about. Do you have a moment like that, or do you have?
Oh yeah,
Okay,
it was that I was 13 or maybe had just turned 14. It was that Suncoast video trip where I bought a VHS tape of The Gates of Hell,
okay,
which I mean, I know it's City of the Living Dead, but like once you're introduced to a movie by the wrong title, that's just what it is in your head forever.
yeah, 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 yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah, I it's the only time I've ever almost thrown up from a movie, like the scene where Daniela Doria vomits up her intestines.
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
had no idea that was even possible. Like that someone could do that in a movie.
Yeah, yeah,
And I just, there's all this blasphemy and maggots and gore. I was
yeah,
like, who is this man, Lucio Fulci? And at the time I was like, how do I pronounce this?
yeah, 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 yeah.
Because my family's not Italian.
Mhm.
But that's really what changed everything for me.
That's awesome. What an introduction to with Fulci. And then how was discovery for you? So was it just like, did you have a community, or was it like, did you go get like, magazines, and like how was that kind of, how did you go deeper into this genre as you discovered it? Do you remember?
So it was a combination of things. I definitely had some books that pointed me in the right direction. I had this book that I still have and still love called Terror on Tape.
Okay.
And it's a series of capsule reviews in alphabetical order. and he tries to cover every horror film he can find, and even horror adjacent stuff. Like there are a lot of thrillers and like gothic
Hmm.
comedies in there. Everything he could find.
Okay.
And I have a weird relationship with this book because I so often disagree with his opinions, but because I've read it so many times, I
Uh-huh.
can like read between the lines and figure out which movies I'm gonna love based on how much he hates them.
And why he hates them?
Yes, like this is not a man who likes Euro horror, which it took me a while to figure out,
Hmm.
but that was a big help. Just like seeing titles listed out and
Yeah.
hearing a general plot, hearing, oh, maybe here's a country I should pay attention to, or a director's name I should pay
Yeah.
attention to. Definitely magazines like Video Watchdog and stuff like that, Fangoria. And then when I was about 14 or 15, I started at a probably way too young age, started going to these screenings run by Exhumed Films,
Oh,
who
cool.
are, yeah, they're this, for anyone who doesn't know, they're a film collective still going. They're 25 years old now. Um, and they started off putting on like double features, triple features, mostly Italian horror and Euro
Yeah.
horror. And they introduced me to so many things. They also, when they first started, had like a sort of like a video search of Miami type of catalog where they
Okay.
would they would rip movies onto a tape and sell the tapes. And that was how I saw so many things that I never would have had access to. So they're responsible for a lot.
Isn't that Uncle Jesse's first project?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, that's right, because we had him on earlier, and I think he was saying his first movie there was The Beyond, if I remember right. The very
Yeah.
first one they did there, if I remember right.
Yeah, I wasn't there for the first screening. I only so the original venue where they had their screenings,
Hmm.
I went because I was a 13-year-old girl. I
Uh-huh.
went to Rocky Horror at midnight,
That's
and
awesome.
I really got away with a lot as a teenager. Probably because all I actually wanted to do was like watch movies and read books at home. So
Yeah, yeah,
any of
yeah,
the
yeah.
times I wanted to go out, my family was like, "For the
Sure.
love of God, get out of the
Be
house."
social.
Yes, be social for once. But I found out about them because it was the same theater that
Hmm.
I think sadly has been torn down. But
Okay.
it was like, what is this? Like this director that I just found out about, there are people here screening his movies. Like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's amazing. My teenagers were mostly music. Movies came a little bit later, but I remember in a lot of punk, you mentioned metal, they would list other bands that they liked or they went on tour
yeah.
with and all this. So the discovery process was kind of organic that way, but I was always wondering what that was like for movies. So thank you. It's
I
cool.
think it was very parallel for me because I was also super into music at the
Okay.
same time, and especially like goth, industrial, metal,
Hmm.
some punk. And I feel like whenever you would read interviews with musicians and they would ask about influences, they would always talk about their favorite
So
filmmakers.
true.
And
Yeah.
so I was like, "Oh, okay, well now that's I this is really embarrassing, but I'm pretty sure that I found out about Jodorowsky from some Marilyn Manson interview when I was like 15."
That's awesome. That's awesome. I forget that guy's name, Michael or Brian, or it's a fairly standard name. But he's a very well educated man. Super interesting to hear his interviews and stuff.
I mean,
But
he is a horrible creep, but yes, very interesting.
totally, no, has not aged well. Um, okay, so then you kind of get into adulthood, and from what I can tell from just finding you on LinkedIn and kind of I'm curious to hear more about this, but from what I can tell, you started off having a little bit more of a, let's call it a typical career in terms of, I think Whole Foods I saw in there at some point, or you just you're kind of in like a day job, and was this, but at the same time, I think you went to film school, right? So were you,
No, so I was
correct me
pretty
here? Yeah.
torn about what I wanted to do.
Okay.
I initially went to college for pre-med, and
Okay.
I worked in a morgue for a while and wanted to be basically a forensic pathologist, but I also just loved writing so much and wound up getting a degree in English and Spent a lot of time in the medieval studies department because I am a
Okay.
nerd. And I went to grad school. I've been to grad school a couple times because I just love going to school
Mm,
and doing research. And it took me a while to realize like academia is not the right place for me because it's way too conservative in a lot of ways. And it's also a lot like shouting into the void. Like, if you write a
mm.
book that passes academic standards, the average person is not gonna A, be able to afford this $90 book, and B, they're probably not gonna know what the fuck you're saying. And
Okay.
so I think once I started to get published academically, and in grad school, I studied theater history, philosophy, and film. So I didn't go to film
Oh,
school, but I did write about film and take film classes in grad school.
okay.
So it was mostly just like I knew I wanted to write, and that was what I cared about more than anything else. It just took me a couple years to figure out what that would look like for me and
Hmm.
also to develop a work ethic because no one in their 20s really
Nope.
has one.
Nope. Yeah, they don't teach that in liberal arts.
No.
Okay, and that was in Pennsylvania, is that right? Is that when you?
So I went to grad school at Tufts in Boston and
Oh,
at the University of Pennsylvania in Philly.
okay. And is Romero from Philly or is he from Pittsburgh?
He's from Pittsburgh,
Oh, Pittsburgh. Okay.
which is across the state. It's
Yeah,
like
not
a
even.
whole different state, actually.
Okay. 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 Yeah, because I saw Pennsylvania there, and I was wondering if what it was like growing up with Romero, but I guess you didn't. Philadelphia is quite different.
It's actually really embarrassing because I grew up outside of Philly, and then I've lived in different cities on the East Coast
Hmm.
throughout my adult life, but I lived in Philly for a while, but I never really go to the rest of Pennsylvania, so like I would not be a good person to tell you about what it's like, which is embarrassing because I have lived in the state for so long.
I mean, I live in Austin, Texas. You could ask me a question about Houston, I wouldn't know. So,
Yeah, same.
I
I feel like that's a really good comparison is like unlike other states, it's like so different based on where you are.
yeah, yeah, I totally get that. Okay, and so you have these degrees and this time in school. You start
And I
writing.
also I don't think I said also started when I was in college. I started writing well, in high school I started writing zines
Okay.
because my amazing art teacher somehow got this program set up where you could be an AP art student. And so
Okay.
I was in the art room like half the day doing
Okay.
whatever I wanted because
Oh,
this
interesting.
man was incredible. So if I had a project, if I said like I want to make a zine, he would be like, "Yeah, who else wants to make a zine?" And so that's what we would do.
Huh.
And
Interesting.
so out of that, I started a blog in college, and that's sort of where my actual writing took off from.
Is that still on the internet somewhere?
God, no. No, because at the time, I didn't know how to use Blogger, but my
Hmm.
dad is like a fancy web architect,
Okay.
developer type of person. And so conned him into building me a basic
Nice.
website. I
Uh-huh.
honestly don't even remember what it was called or what the URL is.
See if somebody can find it. But all right. And so you started writing more full time. One of the things I feel like there's something happening kind of on the Northeast when with a lot of writers that kind of know each other, whether it was from film programming or curation or writing or blogging or I don't know, some like it just feels like people kind of started to meet each other. So did you start to become kind of a part of that community over time?
So I think the Exhumed guys are really responsible for a lot of that because
Oh, cool.
once people found out about them, they would travel to their shows. Like, are you familiar with Justin Love, who
I
does a lot
I
of
know that.
design work for Vinegar Syndrome? He does a lot
Yeah.
of cover. So he and I have known each other since we were like 13.
Nice.
And
Okay.
just because we happened to grow up near each other, but we
Hmm.
became friends through Exhumed.
Okay.
So I think because there was a place, it's sort of like when you start meeting people at shows because you're all going to the same shows. It was like
Hmm.
we were all very fortunate to have people screening impossible to find 35 millimeter prints, especially at that time.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I think that sort of drew people together. I also knew a lot of people who would travel up to New York for screenings. And so it's like you just start to see the same people.
That's awesome. Um, y- One of the things I think is always interesting when I hear your commentary example for Zero Woman, which, by the way, if anybody is not does not own that, they should hear it. It's an amazing commentary. But you know, the thing that has been so interesting about Vinegar Syndrome, and I think you're a big part of this, and Kat's a big part of this. And there's a few people that are adding, and forgive me if I hope this you understand what I'm trying to say, a criterion level of research and critique and you know sort of historical context and everything to genre films, right? And it's so nice to see it represented. I recorded a whole episode with Bleeding Skull about this very topic, and I forgot to hit record, which I cried
No, we've
for
all
like
been there. Like we have all been there and it hurts every time.
it was so bad. Because you know Joe's done a very good job of this as well, and Andy they've also I think even on lower budget productions and sometimes you know they do like the SOV stuff a lot. But I love the idea that now there is this kind of maybe cohort or generation of writers adding that Annette Insdorf style of research onto genre films, and so I feel like you're very central to that. Did you? But you also have that. You also are on Kino releases, right? And you have a lot of noir, and you have that kind of both sides of the brain. So, have you always wanted to write about both? Like, is that something where you just kind of you just love movies and like you just want to talk about everything?
Yeah, not to keep jumping back to Fulci, but maybe not even Fulci, but I think for me, where it came from was I tend to be like totally unintentionally, it's not a conscious thing. It might be more conscious now in my career, but I've always had this sort of championing the underdog
Okay.
just strain in my brain. And
Yeah.
so as a teenager getting into the horror genre, a lot of the people I spent time with were men because
Okay.
that's all there was.
Hmm.
And I think in a lot of places. And much like going to punk or metal shows, there tends to be this hierarchy where people have identified what's cool. And if you
Hmm.
want to be friends with them, you need to think the same things are cool. And if you like other things, then maybe somebody will not think as highly of you. And
Hmm. Hmm.
for me, that was stuff like New York Ripper and Jean Rollins films where
Uh-huh.
I would just, especially the weirder Euro horror. I think at the time I knew a lot of male horror fans who were more into American horror and slasher films. And like, not that I don't like them, but I tend to always just be drawn towards the weirder, more
Hmm.
surreal, less conventional stuff. And so I really started to think like, why is it okay to care about these movies but not these?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the older I got, the more I started writing, I started to feel that way just more and more. And sort of to the point where it's like, well, why is it okay to talk about Citizen Kane, but we can't talk about, Deep Throat in the same way? And like
Uh-huh.
not that Deep Throat is Damiano's masterpiece or anything, but to me it's like it's all cinema. You should be able to
Hmm.
talk about it all, including
Yep.
SOV movies, like with the same respect.
Yep.
And it's like a person, not even just a person, but a whole group of people, like took the time and effort and a lot of the times took a lot of love to make these films. And so I think at minimum, all what we could do as critics is give that the respect it deserves.
There was a I had Troll 2 was my gateway to this line of thinking because then when I
It's
first saw it,
wonderful.
it's amazing, right? And when I first saw it, I laughed at it, just like I think most people,
Oh,
right?
sure.
They're like, "What the hell is this?" And then the more I started digging into the career of the director and seeing the films that he wrote, and started watching some of those movies that he wrote, I was like, "Oh, it's not like the whole like so bad it's good thing," you know? I was like, I think he just has like a style that is just fun to watch. Like it just changed the way it kind of like changed my brain a little bit. And I can't watch Troll 2 now with the same lens I did at 16 or 17 or whatever,
Which
whenever I
is how
saw it.
it's supposed to be. Like, yeah, your
Yeah.
perspective should change. And that definitely is how it was for me too. It was like when you're told that you're just supposed to laugh at something that's different, you laugh at it. But
Right.
then you reach a point where you're like, wait, why does different have to be bad?
Yeah.
Like, maybe that makes it special.
What was there a commentary or an essay or any of these things you've done where you're kind of like, okay, like like I might get some heat for this one as far as like, or people might laugh at this one, or is there anyone where you felt like particularly self-conscious, or is this just something that you're very passionate about and you kind of plow through?
Um, I think so. In my early years of doing commentaries, did mostly, I would say more Euro horror than anything
Hmm.
else, because I think that was just what people knew me for.
Hmm.
But then, like, I think the thing with commentaries that a lot of people don't understand is it is a very specific skill set. Like, especially if you want to do a commentary that's research heavy. So, if someone's going to hire you, they need to know that you can talk for 90 minutes. Or I've
Hmm.
done some commentaries that are almost 3 hours long, which
Okay.
is, it's a journey. Not always a pleasant one.
Uh-huh.
But it's like once people figure out that you have that skill set and that you're
Hmm.
reliable, I started getting asked to do just more and more weirder, more unexpected things.
Okay.
Definitely Vinegar Syndrome asked me to do Killing Birds, the Joe D'Amato movie that everyone laughs at. And I was like, all right, I'm not just going to do this, I'm going to do it. And I love Joe D'Amato. So I took it really
Sure.
seriously. And bizarrely, that's one of the commentaries that I get the most compliments on. And it's like, I never thought anyone would even listen to it. So it's just a nice feeling.
No, but I think that's a good segue. So you have a style that I think is um, nice to listen to because I think there's two styles that work very well in commentaries. One is, are you familiar with Mike Leader and Arne Venema, those two?
Hmm.
So they're more like entertainment based. I mean, they'll give a lot of information about the
Sure.
what's going on, but it's like stories because they were on set or like just
Yeah.
crazy, crazy stories about working with the triads or like whatever. Like it's more sort of like entertaining and you learn a little bit, but it's like just fun and interesting, right? And
Yeah.
then there's that style works well. And then there's the research style commentary, which can work well and can also not work well depending on
It
who's
can be
doing it.
very boring.
Yeah, and I won't mention the names of the ones that I don't like that are part of the Criterion Collection, um, but there's, I think the thing that I enjoy about yours is I feel like you're gonna walk me through this journey, and you set it up well, almost like the way that I learned to write essays, where it's kind of structured. You have like an intro, and
Yep.
here's your points and all that, because you'll say like, okay, I'm gonna get to this later, or I'm gonna talk about this later, or like this one's. So I think it makes me feel sort of like relaxed as I'm listening, and just trusting that like if the if there's something that I really want to hear about. Um, the one that comes to mind again, just because I just turned it off last night, as I was watching Zero Woman, you said there. I was very intrigued at your when you started talking about budgets of these Pinky Violence movies, and you said I'm going to get to it later. So that kind of like hooked me in the brain of like when is she going to talk about that? Because it's something I've always wondered about. But anyways, for what it's worth, I just think it works very well. It's not boring, and it's very soothing and kind of relaxing to just go and kind of watch the movie and just learn a whole bunch about the context around it, the genre, the actors, the crew, right? Like it's you're very thorough. So I don't know. I guess there's not a question there, but thank you.
Well, no, I think you are totally accurate that the way I approach it is I make the same type of outline that I would make if I was writing a book or if I was
Mm,
writing an essay or if I was giving a talk, because that's just like my academic training, and
mm, mhm,
it helps me. Like, I need to be organized or else my brain is just in chaos. So it's like I
mhm,
have to have that kind of outline. And I always try to go into it with this overall question of why should you as a viewer care about this film? And also,
mm,
why do I care about this film? I'm
mm.
like, sometimes I don't get very personal, but like, I am recording a commentary today where I just am unabashedly like, I love this movie. I don't care if
Uh-huh.
anyone else likes it or not.
Uh-huh. Awesome. No, that's great. It's very effective, so please keep
Thank
that
you.
style. Yeah, yeah. Of course. How many things are you doing concurrently right now? How many projects do you have at the same time?
Uh, Probably like 5. It's
Jeez.
it's been a struggle. I have had some personal stuff going on, which if I am like at 100% at, normal capacity, I can work really, really fast, which is a skill that I had to learn, and I think some of it is just personality.
Okay.
But, it's like when life is stressful and you're not at 100%, it can definitely be harder to meet all of the deadlines. So
Sure.
sometimes it's like, well, I'm just not going to sleep until I get this done.
Jeez. Um, how much would you say? I know each sort of different project probably has a different prep time. If you're going to do a video essay, how much prep time does that usually take, like research and some of
Mm,
that?
So depending on what it is,
Hmm.
really, so I think also to answer your question in kind of a roundabout way, I think why the same people get hired over and over to do critical work is because if you know what you're doing,
Hmm.
it's much you can work much more quickly than, like, if it's your first commentary, when it
Hmm.
could take you weeks because you're just
Oh,
not, like, used to the rhythm of it. I would say it usually takes me a couple days for a video essay because I do the res I w so I watch the movie, I do research, I make an outline, I figure out, is there something I wanna know that I don't know that I might have to do more research?
hmm.
And for me, that's always the longest part.
Hmm.
Whereas doing the actual video editing, because I'm now so used to it, it just doesn't take as long.
Okay, that's good to know. But that's all you like. You find the images and the videos and everything, and you put it all together.
Yeah. And I learned to do that
Okay.
just by Googling how to do it. Because,
Nice.
well, I think so with a career like this, unless you have a background in sound editing,
Hmm.
audio or video editing, and all kinds of other technical things. It really limits what you're able to do if you can't do those things yourself. So like
Hmm.
when I first started podcasting, that was how I kind of learned to record commentaries, but it
Okay.
was a slow process. And you reach a point where people will say, "Oh, do you want to do a video essay on this?" And you're like, "I don't know how to do that." So, a lot of my, like, day-to-day work for Vinegar Syndrome does involve me editing other people's video essays because they don't know how to do that, which is why it's
Oh,
great to have somebody like that on staff.
interesting. Okay. So that's what you do from 9 to 5 or 8 to 8 or whatever that vinegar syndrome hours are. And then
Yeah,
in this,
I have crazy hours, just
I'm
I think everyone there does because there's just
sure,
always so much to do.
kind of startup mentality, right? It's not
Yeah,
quite MGM Studios yet. Um,
don't say those words to me. They're very difficult to work with.
oh, I chose the wrong one. Okay. What's a good one? They're not Fox Searchlight yet.
Honestly, I don't even know.
Fair enough. Um, but that brings me to something that I'd initially kind of reached out to you on, and we don't have to make it the focus, but I'm curious, um, guessing kind of roughly at the timelines of when you got started writing and doing this versus now. I feel like the idea of a film critic and kind of a film historian has changed just generally.
Yeah.
Can you talk at all about that? Like how has it changed for you, kind of being in it?
So for me, I think since I started, I want to say I started writing not professionally, but writing seriously in maybe the late 2000s.
Mhm.
And that was really where I developed my sense of insane, obsession with work and
Okay.
work ethic because I made myself write a review every single day. And I
Okay.
just did that for years.
Okay.
And so it really like you have to be mentally ill to be in this job, which I tell everyone like this is not a job for sane people. But when I first started writing, I was really frustrated because I felt like there were two types of film critics, or maybe three types. Type number one would be the sort of obvious Ebert, like these are
Hmm.
mainstream people who care about conventional mainstream Hollywood films. Sometimes they see art house movies, they hate genre films,
Uh-huh.
and they're writing towards a mainstream audience, which
Hmm.
I've never really wanted to, that would not be a good fit for me.
Okay.
The second type, academics. They're writing for other academics or
Mm.
they're doing academic style lectures for companies like Criterion. And that was something that appealed to me, but it felt like I just didn't even know how do you get to be one of those
Mm.
guys
Okay.
unless you have 5 PhDs and have been teaching for 20 years or something.
Interesting. Okay.
And then the third type were the sort of Tim Lucas guys who I think started off in writing in a more casual tone, like writing from a sense of fan love, if that makes
Mm-hmm.
sense. Like I
Mm-hmm.
am a huge fan of this film and I love these weird genre movies. And so
Uh-huh.
they don't care about a mainstream audience. They don't have any academic training. They just have the love.
Mm-hmm.
And so aside from the academics, it seemed like those other two groups were also mostly men
Mm.
who didn't like most of the things I liked. And
Mm.
or at least if they liked things I liked, it was maybe not for the same reason.
Okay.
And now I think that's totally changed. It's like there's so much more blurring between the three, so I think you get people like Bleeding Skull who I would never in a million years call them mainstream, but like they've built a whole community and developed a
Mm-hmm.
whole following and are very serious and passionate about low budget and shot on video
Yeah.
movies. And it seems like most of the writers and critics in my generation and a little bit older than me, like the Gen X folks, I think found a way to blend more of those things and also found a way to create community more. Like it seems
Mm.
like community is important to a lot of us. Like a lot of
Mm.
us know each other, we go to screenings together, we work on projects together,
Mm-hmm.
which is great, but also there's just so many more types of voices now. Like we don't have to only hear 50-year-old guys talking about giallo movies and naked women. It's like there's a whole array of options.
That's an interesting. That might be an interesting place to kind of go just for a second. So it's the second time you've mentioned kind of coming into a man's world, and I think that's true maybe across writing as well as even filmmaking, right? You have people
Oh,
like
yeah.
Catherine Breillat or Brillat. I'm not
Brea.
sure. Briat.
Yeah,
Thank
that
you.
double L in French is usually a Y.
Okay, Briat. Thank you. This age-old question for me. Um, people are always shocked that it's a woman making those movies, right?
And she gets so mad when people try to call her a feminist, which is one of my favorite things ever. Like
Uh,
she's like offended by it.
yeah, yeah, like Scary of 61st, I think is one that just came out that's I hope I got the name right. Interesting women that are coming up and directing now kind of genre movies, right? It does feel to me, and maybe the path that Catherine Breillat started years ago. There's a few more women that were making genre stuff, but it feels like it's easier now for women to get in to make these things and maybe be
Yeah.
recognized as scholars more easily. I don't know. Are you sensing a shift at all, or are you still feeling
Oh, I think there's a big shift. I
okay?
think in the last 10 years alone,
Hmm.
I suddenly have female friends who like genre movies.
Okay,
And
good.
before I had maybe like one
Okay.
because I think people feel more comfortable like growing up if you're told like or not even told, but if you pick up on the fact that like this is a male space and you're going to have to deal with some harassment if you want to be
Mm,
in that space, you either have to have a personality like mine, and a lot of it goes over your head because you're just like on the spectrum and you don't pick up on on as much weirdness. It's a blessing in disguise a lot of the time. Or you have to be really assertive. Like,
Mm,
I don't
mm.
know if you've ever met Kayla Janice, but I can't imagine anyone inappropriately hitting on her. She would wipe the floor with them. So it's like the more women and queer people and people of color
Mhm,
that are in space, these types of spaces, especially in the arts,
mhm,
and the more visibility there is, I think it makes it easier for everyone.
mm.
Like, even for the straight white men who maybe wanted to share a different opinion but didn't feel comfortable to do so. Like, I think it just makes it better overall.
Yeah, that's good to hear. And I do have to say that hearing the way you speak about rape on screen or sexual assault on screen, and putting it in the context of what's happening in the movie, and like, not that it's ever okay in the act, but like sort of saying, not that I've never heard you justify it, but I think the way that you speak about it in terms of this is part of the genre, or this is part of the expectations for the genre, or this is part of the film. I do think, from again, not that I have a lot of authority to speak on this, but I do think it helps normalize, that it's okay to kind of enjoy these movies, or right, be around these movies, to hear it from you as opposed to hearing it from another dude that's just like, you know. So I think it adds a
Yeah.
credibility that you're saying it as well, if that
Yeah,
makes sense.
and in a way, I wish that wasn't the case, and I feel like maybe at some point in the future it won't be as much, but, like, yeah, when the only articles you're reading and commentaries you're listening to are people who are like, haha, look, titties. I'm like, I'm bisexual. I love titties too, but like there's a way to talk about nudity in a film with
Right,
respect and
right.
not like, you're on your podcast. And that actually drives me crazy. Like if you're doing a commentary or you're doing something for a professional release, I feel like you should have a different tone than when
Mm,
you're doing some sort of casual private thing.
mm, mm.
But
No, I
yeah, it's
totally.
like there are people who love these movies for a reason, and I think growing up, you're constantly surrounded by mainstream media and, non-genre movie fans who are like, "Ooh, that's gross," or "Ooh, that's stupid. Why would you
Hmm,
like that?" And it's
hmm,
like,
hmm.
well, some you like what you like.
Yeah, it's true. It's nice to find community, though, as we've been saying. It's because it's
Definitely.
it's nice not to feel alone in it. Um, okay, so did you want to be a critic initially, or did you want to be a film historian? And kind of, I'm curious how this. I know you mentioned before that we started recording, kind of how you got that label, where it came from. But in your mind, like, did you just want to be a scholar about movies, or like, what was your goal here?
Yeah, I think I just my first goal, I would say I just wanted to write.
Okay.
I, I have a form of bipolar disorder. I deal with anxiety and depression and, lots of the pretty common mental health issues that a lot of other people deal with. And for me, once I figured out that writing made me feel the way that it does,
Mm-hmm.
it's like that's my source of stability. Like
Hmm.
no matter what's going on in my life, like all I have to do is sit down and write and everything is okay.
Oh,
And so
interesting.
it started off with like, okay, because of my bipolar disorder, one of the like I don't have regular bipolar. I have what's called bipolar 2. So it's a
Okay.
little bit different. I don't have the like crazy manic highs that people know about. But with bipolar 2, you get something called hypomania, where you get really like you need to fixate on something
Yeah.
and it's I guess it's kind of maybe a little bit like the opposite of ADHD, where it's like if I have something that I can like really where I can go down a rabbit hole and do all kinds of research and be really focused on it, it just
Yeah.
makes me feel better and makes me feel, you know, healthy. And so I decided like, okay, maybe that's just how this is going to work for me. So my first goal was just I want to write all the time and feel like I can actually call myself a writer.
Yeah.
And then I fell in love with writing books and that like
Okay.
if If I won the lottery, I would just write books.
Okay.
'Cause that's what I truly love to do, but there's no money in it and no one wants to read. Maybe like 100 people wanna read, niche film books, but
Well, that's a good segue, though. Well, okay, before I talk about that, because I want to spend some time promoting some of the variety of ways that you're engaged and people can engage with you. But thank you for being so open about that. I think it's really important that people speak openly about any kind of mental health related issue. It's a very personal thing for me. Anyways, but um, do you think that you watch movies and ingest movies and entertainment differently, almost like in like an advantageous way, to where you kind of, due to maybe being neurodivergent in some capacity, or that you experience art like in a different way than yeah.
oh, I totally think so. I mean, I grew up in a really abusive environment the first maybe 12 years of my life. And so the way that I like learned how to have feelings and talk about feelings and
Hmm.
work out what they were was by reading books and watching movies and listening to music.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so often I find myself like if I'm having personal issues, sometimes I'll unintentionally watch movies that deal with that theme and realize later like, "Oh, I maybe this is just how I processed that."
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's I think art as well, like painting and sculpture and things like that, that's my conduit to the world.
I'm pretty sure I've never been tested for ADD, but I'm very sure that I have some form of it, just in terms of how my attention span and focus and different things. But there are certain moments where art can like stop me and like sort of uh, it's a very emotional experience. It's hard to explain, but it's like a there's not much in the world that can like slow my brain down and just like cause me to just stop and like focus everything on it. And art's the only thing that can do it. Music was my entry into that, and movies has certainly been that way for me sometimes as well.
Oh, me
Um,
too, definitely. Yeah, my background before I started writing heavily, I danced for a long time,
okay.
and that was how I figured out like, "Oh, this is one thing that will really just, like, knock my anxiety out." Like, it's just
Yeah,
gone.
that's awesome.
Uh-huh.
So important too, right? I mean, like you have to you learn these like coping things early on. It's random. It's a very specific memory, but uh, what's that movie? Is it Road to Redemption? Is that right? The Sam Mendes movie,
That
uh,
sounds right.
um, um, the gangster movie.
I haven't seen
Anyways,
it, but I know
eh,
the title.
okay, yeah, I can find it in a second. But there's a scene in there. It was the first time I saw Reverse Dolly. And I just remember I was in high school, I think, or maybe it was right in early college. I can't remember the year it came out. But it was like one of these foundational moments for me where it's like my brain couldn't process what was happening on the screen. And so like I realized that I wanted to go seek out visually interesting things on screen, like which led me to surrealism and a lot of experimental filmmaking and a lot of that stuff. Because like that was the way that it kind of resonated with me, was when there's just something that wasn't supposed to be happening on screen. That was
That's totally what it was for me. I was a big, which will probably not surprise you, library nerd
okay.
when I was a kid, and because I was in there so much, my school librarians would let me check anything out without seeing what it was,
Nice.
and I found all these surrealist art books, which like there's not a ton of adult content in them, but there's a lot of nudity just
Sure.
because of the way that those photographs and sculptures and paintings were made. But
Sure.
having those incongruous elements next to each other just blew my mind. And I was
Yeah.
like, I need more of this.
Yes. Exactly. That's why it's hard to explain a Jodorowsky movie. Speaking of that to somebody, you're like, well, it's kind of an emotional experience. You either have it
It's a
or,
journey.
yeah, yeah, you either kind of connect or not. Um, well, anyways, that's something I could talk to you for a long time about. But um, where should people engage with you? Because over the years, you have the Daughters of Darkness podcast, which I believe is no longer active, right?
Yeah, that's been defunct for a few years.
Yeah, okay.
Uh, so right now, probably the best place is either Twitch of the Death Nerve, which
Of course.
is the podcast that I've been doing for, I guess, 2.5 years now. The pandemic, I don't know what year it
It
is,
just
so
blends. Yeah,
it's
yeah.
been happening for a while.
Uh-huh.
And definitely through Instagram, and I can give you my Instagram handle and my email for your show notes. But it's funny, I do get people who can't seem to find my email, and I think that maybe I just need a website that's points people to to how they can find me. But I also have a Patreon,
Yeah,
which
that was
I
my next
always
question.
forget about.
And it's still very active, right? It's an active
Yeah.
Patreon. Yeah, yeah, perfect.
Yeah,
So,
I usually post something in there a couple times a month. We do the Death Nerve episodes early, we do bonus episodes, and I do a lot of solo podcasting stuff. Like I'm wrapping up a complete series of Jean-Luc Godard's films,
wow.
where I talk about them all in chronological order. I have one episode left. Just need to find more hours in the day to complete it. And then I'm going to do a Fritz Lang series that I'm so excited about.
Sorry. Every single Jean-Luc Godard movie?
Every single one. Not all of
No.
the short films, but every single feature-length film.
What's it? How do people? Because I want to listen to that for sure. How do people find that?
Yeah, it's just on my
Just your name?
Patreon. Yep.
Oh, on the Patreon.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, all right. Then I'll be signing up because that's quite a journey just in and of itself.
It was an experience. Yeah, I had a lot
Yeah.
of fun with it, but there were times where I was like, Jesus Christ, this man needs to get over his ex-girlfriend or his
Fascinating.
ex-wife.
You know, it's funny. I don't want to go too far off, but I think he's probably one of the most misunderstood directors in terms of he's like an entryway for a lot of people. They might see Breathless or
Yeah.
they might see something, but I don't think most people see anything post like 1970 or whatever it is.
Which is why I was like, all right, enough is enough. I'm doing them all.
That's amazing. Yeah, I have a similar interest. I go twice a year. I try to go through some director and just write about it on Reddit. I don't have a formal platform, but it's fun to see like everything from a director. You
It's
get a
my
very different perspective.
favorite.
Yeah. Uh,
That's how I really started my writing practices with my old blog, which was called Axe Wound, but there was another blog with that name, so I eventually changed it to Satanic Pandemonium,
okay.
in honor of the Mexican film. But
Nice.
what I would do is I would pick a topic and I would
Hmm.
make myself a list of films in that topic, and then I would just write about one every day. So
Oh, cool.
once I got past like 2 weeks worth of films, then I moved on to like Fassbender and watched all 45 of his movies.
Wow.
Yeah. But like that's how you learn. Like that's how
Yeah, sure.
you learn how to write, you learn how to have discipline, you fill in gaps
Hmm.
maybe in your film education, and you also learn how to recognize like patterns in directors' work, which is my favorite.
Like just as one tiny example, people talk about surrealism. A lot of times they don't talk about Fellini, but I mean, like the back half of his career was crazier than some of the stuff that even Jodorowsky did.
It's better, I think, than the
Yeah,
first half. Like,
yeah,
not that the
totally agree.
first half of his career isn't great, but like Amarcord and City of Women and like that,
Oh yeah,
that's the
Casanova.
stuff.
Have you seen
Yes.
Casanova? I was just
Yes.
watching this, like, what the fuck? How is nobody talking about this? Um, yeah, but cool. Well, Sam, what a joy to talk to you. Is there anything you can talk about? 'Cause this will for sure drop in March, not in February. So, is there anything you can talk about from Vinegar Syndrome standpoint that you're working on, or that will drop in March and you want to point people to?
I honestly don't know.
Okay,
I'm
that's fine.
really bad at knowing when things are going to be announced.
That's okay.
I will say that I think main focus with Vinegar Syndrome this year, or at least the next couple months, is going to be on Hong Kong cinema, which
Oh, cool.
is something I'm really excited about. And it just makes getting up and having to do work just a joy. And I'm also in the process of writing a book about extreme Hong Kong films. So it's kind of nice to have those two things line up
Mm-hmm.
because it's like my research brain can just always be on, which
Perfect.
is my favorite state to be in.
Specifically Cat 3 or just general like films from Hong Kong?
So As for the vinegar
For
syndrome
the
stuff
book,
or the
sorry, the
book?
book.
The book, it's the main focus is going to be Cat 3,
Oh,
but I
wow.
also want to talk about more extreme films, so there will probably be like some 2B, like not as extreme, like that fit into the same subgenre.
Hmm.
So that's why I was like, okay, it can't be Cat 3 only because there are great films like Taxi Hunter that is 2B, even though it's deranged and should be Cat 3 probably.
Not exactly the same, but it's like I was born in 82, so the stuff I grew up with was like the Dark Crystal and like some of these.
I was
You
born in
look,
83, so I'm right
oh,
there
nice.
with you.
Yeah, you like, how is this a kid's movie? I mean, like it's,
Oh
technically
my
there's
God,
nothing like,
they're also sad. They either
yeah,
had they usually had a combination of terrifying monsters, like Neverending Story and Gomork.
yep,
Like as a
yep,
kid, I was just like,
yep, yep, yep. I guess we're tougher for it though.
I think it also gives you or at least it gave me a love for like weird dark fantasy
Totally.
and having those kinds of unexpected elements pop up, like more surreal things, which is definitely how I fell in love with Hong Kong cinema because
Mm,
there's so much that like I think with East Asian cinema in general, there isn't this like desperate need for realism like there is with
mm-hmm.
Hollywood, so
Yeah,
you could just
yep.
have more fun.
That was a question I asked because when I interviewed Mike Leader about roughly about a year ago, and Arna, they've been in Hong Kong for a while now. They've lived there for a
Yeah.
while, and that was a question I had for them. I was like, "What is going on? like, how are they can they just like produce stuff that's so detached from reality and like it's I mean there's no concrete answer for that, but it's true. Like the films over there are so creative. It's amazing.
I think it's just some of it is cultural. Like, you
Mm,
could ask, why do Indian films have so much singing? And it's just like, that's a standard and
mm.
a delightful standard. But I think with Hong Kong movies and even with Japanese cinema, like to your point about Zero Woman, it's when you have these different types of production models and your exploitation movies are coming from like well-seasoned, experienced studio people
Yeah, yeah.
versus a teenager who's making an SOV movie like with his kid sister. It's like
Uh-huh.
they're gonna look different.
Uh-huh. Yeah, yeah. Well, so excited for that. The other books that you've made, are they in print still? Can people still buy them?
Well, most of them are. So I did a book on Jean Rollin that I
Hmm.
edited and wrote part of called Lost Girls that is out of print. But I wrote a monograph on Fritz Lang's M a couple years ago that you could still find. I wrote a book called The Legacy of World War II in European Art House Cinema that is widely available. And I guess the other thing I should plug, so this great leftist political publisher called PM Press
Okay.
later this year is putting out a book called Revolution in 35 millimeter that I co-edited and also wrote part of with a really wonderful fiction writer, film critic, historian named Andrew Nett, based in Australia. So I'm really excited for that to come out. It's basically all about mostly leftist depictions of revolution and violence in art house and genre cinema. So
Wow.
we tried to avoid mainstream movies
Okay.
because we didn't want like a lot of them feel like propaganda, so we wanted to
Sure.
see like what's going on the margins.
Okay. Wow. That sounds amazing. I can't wait. When is that coming out?
I believe that's coming out in August.
Okay.
August or
Revolutions.
September.
Revolutions in 35 millimeter.
Yep.
Okay. I'll be getting that. I'll be listening to your, I guess I'll be joining your Patreon so I can hear your complete run through good
Thank
art.
you.
And yeah, I'll make sure to continue supporting Vinegar Syndrome. I've been a subscriber. This is I just did my fourth year, I believe, in January.
Nice.
So it's been a big of the shelf over there. That's the genre shelf that you can see in the background. I'm having a struggle right now because the bottom three shelves are Vinegar Syndrome, and they're all double stacked, and there's nowhere to go. But I've got 12 more months of
That's the
movies coming.
struggle.
I know, I know. And this is my kid's room too, so that's his bed right there. If you can see his little race car bed, which is
Wow.
Not ideal for having all this stuff right next to it. At some point, I'll be the cool dad. Um, Sam, thank you so much. This has been a true
Thank you.
pleasure. Yeah. Anything else that you wish I would have asked before we wrap it up?
I don't think so.
Cool. Well, please continue doing what you do, and I hope your personal stuff gets sorted out so you can do 10 at a time instead of 5.
Thank you. Me too. Like, God, can I just work some more, please? Possibly I
Awesome.
need to take a vacation, but
That's super. All right. Well, thank you so much for the time, and yeah, see you around.